next presenter is Joel Grus. He's principal engineer at Flatfile. He's also former vice president at Goldman Sachs and former ML engineer at Capital Group. I asked him for his term, and he said he's a builder. And he's going to talk to us about LLM simplicity, which I'm super excited to hear. Welcome, Joel.
So, hello, everybody. I'm Joel, and as was said in my introduction, I'm an engineer at Flatfile, where we make the world's best data exchange platform. If you want to accept money from your customers, you use Stripe. If you want to accept data from your customers, you use Flatfile. So it's an interesting business, and it's not what I'm going to talk about. I probably won't say anything else about it. But I work on kind of everything from back-end engineering to front-end engineering, machine learning engineering, machine learning, product strategy, machine learning strategy, et cetera, et cetera. I do a little bit of it all. So in addition to that, I also write books about data science, and I speak here a lot of years. And I grew up here. Actually, the mall across the street is where I used to hang out when I was in high school. So I went there last night, and the arcade is no longer there, and it doesn't look very familiar, and it's kind of weird to be back, but it's always fun to be at this conference. And so thanks for coming. Thanks to the organizers for having me. And every year, Mark or Khalifa reaches out a few months before the conference and says, "What are you going to speak about?" And I say, "I don't know, that's like a few months away." And then sometimes they just assign me a talk, like they did this year. And Mark said, "You're going to be speaking about LLM simplicity." So that's what I'm going to be speaking about. And it's a good topic because these language models are a lot more simple than they were a year ago. And when I say that they're more simple than they were a year ago, I'm talking about ChatGPT, mostly. And so I'm not saying that ChatGPT is simple, because it isn't. But if you were here last year, and if you saw my talk last year was about simplicity, which was, I think, why I got assigned the topic LLM simplicity. But the talk was really about, one, how we should try to solve our problems in simple ways, but two, that simplicity is not sort of intrinsic to a model or a concept, but is instead a function of the tools we have at our disposal. There were lots of woodworking analogies and lots of ugly Dali photos and so on. And so ChatGPT is a good example of this. If you'd gone back in time about a year and a half or 2 years, it would be very complicated to interact with one of these large language models. There was not an easy way to do it. It was clunky. You'd have to run some hardware yourself. And ChatGPT suddenly made it very simple to interact with one of these things. You go to a website, you start chatting, you ask questions, you get responses. Simple. And you already know how to chat online, so it's not like there's a lot for you to learn there to sort of get started and dive in. And indeed, if you go to ChatGPT and ask it, are you simple? It'll kind of give you the same answer. It'll say, you know what, I'm based on some really complicated models, and there's a lot of fancy math going on, and it's trained on a lot of data, but at the same time, I'm very simple to use. And chatting is sort of a very easy way of interacting. So you can think of me as simple in that sense. And then it also goes on to add that it's simple in that it's not self-aware and doesn't have conscious thought, and so maybe that's another sense in which it's simple. But if it was self-aware and did have conscious thought, it would probably say the same thing, so I don't know that we can conclude a lot based just on that denial. So anyway, I needed to write a talk about LLMs and how simple they are. But the reality is I don't actually know that much about LLMs. I've done a lot of NLP, but I don't know much about LLMs. You've heard from a lot of real experts, today and yesterday about how to fine-tune an LLM model, how to deploy an LLM model, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not one of those people. I'm just a guy who uses a lot of ChatGPT, like a lot of ChatGPT. And so I thought, it's a data science conference, maybe I can start by going and downloading my ChatGPT history. OpenAI will let you do that. You get some JSON files that has, here are the many thousands of chats you've had with ChatGPT. So I did that. And then I thought, I can write some Python code to process it. It comes out in this really complicated JSON format, but there's some tools. I found one called QuickType that will take a complicated JSON and create all the Python data classes for you, so you can just sort of work with it naturally, which is really cool. I like that a lot. So then I had the data in Python and I could do stuff with it. And then I thought, I'll use ChatGPT to analyze ChatGPT. So I used like my entire month's OpenAI budget. Like I hit the ceiling, getting ChatGPT to like tag all my chats and summarize the chats, and then tell me how interesting is this, and how offensive is this, and how embarrassing is this, and all sorts of stuff. And I was like, this is gonna be really cool. I used the new functionality. And then I started writing the talk, and I didn't really end up using any of that stuff. I got to that part, and I have a little bit at the end, and I may talk about it, but that's not what the talk ended up being about. But it's not really about LLM simplicity either. Like I sat down and I was describing to people yesterday what I'm talking about. And so now I think that if I were like pitching the talk and like giving it a real title that describes what it's about, I would call it How ChatGPT Changed My Life and How It's Going to Change Yours. So some people are talking about how to fine tune LLMs and deploy them, how to run them in production, how to accustom them to your domain, and so on and so forth. Hopefully I'm talking about something that's simpler than that, because I'm really just talking about how ChatGPT changed my life. But also something, maybe in some ways a little bit deeper than that, in that, working with this tool so much, tool is sort of underselling it, causes me to get a little bit philosophical about what this thing's actually doing and what it's doing to me and what I'm doing with it. And so, I don't mean to talk about just ChatGPT, that's what I use, but really I'm talking about any of these LLMs that's been, reinforcement learning into being a helpful assistant, and that has an easy to use interface and that produces good results. But I'm going to keep saying ChatGPT, and know that I'm speaking a little bit more broadly. So, taking a step back, I've been doing NLP and giving NLP talks for quite a lot of years now, actually. This is me, pre-COVID, talking about NLP, pre-CrossFit. You can see I had a little bit of less muscles. And so I used to work at an organization called the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence. It's an AI research nonprofit. I worked on a project called Allen NLP, which is a library for deep learning research in NLP. And I remember in 2018 I was working there, and this BERT model came out. And it was like mind-blowing. And there were problems we've been working on at AI too, that we'd spent years working on building these complex, like elaborate solutions. And then suddenly you took a BERT model and like fine-tuned it for a few hours, and it did better than these things we've been working on for years. So this was like mind-blowing, but it was mind-blowing to the NLP research community. I could not have gone to the gym and explained to someone, like, here's why BERT is important, here's why you should care about it. It crushed the glue benchmark, and, here's what the glue benchmark is. And so, like, it was cool, but it, like, in some ways it had this really limited impact, on society. ChatGPT was not like that, right? So it came out the very end of November, so less than a year ago. And like, I won't speak for the rest of you, but very, very early on, I had this sense that this is something that's going to change things, right? So this is me 3 days later, 3 days after it's been out. I went to a conference in Austin put on by 1517, which is a venture capital fund run by a couple of friends of mine. So no one, when BERT came out, nobody like outside the NLP research community was talking about it or knew about it. But here you have a bunch of people, and it's VCs, it's engineers, but it's also like politics people, bloggers, Twitter celebrities, and everyone was talking about ChatGPT and like what they thought of it, how worried they were, and so on. And so what was different about it? One thing that I noticed, and I've been doing ML and NLP for a long time, and by nature I'm sort of a cynical and jaded person, and you show me something and I say, oh, whatever. But like, when I started playing with this new tool, it gave me this sense of sort of awe and delight from interacting with it, right? Like, I can't believe that a computer is doing these things. And I work with computers all the time. I've done so much machine learning, so much data science. I know what computers can do. And it was still like, I can't believe this is happening. And I try to hang on to that sense of awe and delight, even as I interact with it now, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But, a year later, we're all pretty used to ChatGPT, right? I have it on the home screen of my phone. I talk to it multiple times a day. I rely on it for a lot of things. And so it's sort of easy to forget how magical it felt that first time. But it really did. And it really does, when you see it like that. And, not everybody. Some people were dismissive of it, and they'd say, oh, it's just paraphrasing, or it's just rewording the internet, it's just regurgitating the web. And people would say that, I'm like, that's not what it feels like to me. Like, I don't feel like this is a paraphrasing machine. I feel like this is something that's coming up with stuff. And I feel like it's trying to answer my questions. And I feel like that's something, important. So let's say, for example, I want a poem where purple is rhymed with orange. Now, probably no one has ever written such a poem, in part because it's hard to rhyme purple with orange, but in part because it's a goofy thing to ask for. And probably no poem exists, or if it does exist, some kid wrote it in 4th grade in crayon and it's on the internet. But I can put this query in a search engine, and the search engine is going to try and find web pages that answer my question. As you can see, these web pages, they don't answer my question. They just have words in common with my question. And maybe it's a different search engine. Maybe it's finding those web pages and even trying to extract text from them that answers my question. But still, that text has to be somewhere in the web pages, right? And maybe it's even trying to look at the web pages and take what they're saying and synthesize an answer from the contents, right? So I'm not just going to regurgitate to you text that I pulled off the web page. I'm going to synthesize what's on those web pages and create an answer for you. But again, because of this limitation of I'm actually trying to summarize web pages for you, you get this experience where it's like a kid who doesn't know the answer and so is trying to distract you by telling you the things that he does know, right? So here, it's hard to rhyme words with purple, and there's not a lot of words that rhyme with orange, and so on and so forth. Well, okay, but that's not what I asked for. So here's ChatGPT, and unfortunately that print is a little bit on the small side, but it's trying to answer my question, right? It says, this is a hard problem to solve, purple and orange don't rhyme, but, let me give it a go, right? I'll give it my best shot. And to me, that's a big difference, right? Between I'm going to go out of the web and try and find the thing that's most like what you asked for and give it to you, versus I'm going to try and give you what you asked for, whether it's out there or not. And it doesn't do a great job of it. These are not great rhymes, but it's a hard question to answer. And when you think about that, how can that not give you a little bit of, again, awe and delight? And like I said, I'm sort of a cynical, jaded person, and so I appreciate this kind of contrarianism of being skeptical of new things, because I was one of these people who never got excited about the generative image models, right? Midjourney or DALL-E or whatever. They were cool toys, but they always kind of felt like toys to me. And so, when people talked about them, they're like, maybe people use them to make deep fakes. I was like, well, you can do those in Photoshop anyway. Is it that big a worry? Or they're like, this will put the people who draw fantasy book covers out of business. And I thought, well, I feel bad for them, but to be honest, they're not a real load-bearing part of society. And so I think we can probably get around that somehow. So I was sort of this doesn't say anything to me about my life. But when I got ChatGPT and I started using it, the ideas just came. And so I asked my daughter to bring me her English homework, and it said, write an essay about this character in The Breadwinner. And so I punched that into ChatGPT, and it generated me an essay, and I showed her the output, and I said, is this a good response to the questions? I haven't read the book, so I don't know if it's a good answer. She's like, yeah, that's a perfectly fine answer. It's probably a better answer than most of the kids in my class will do. It's like, okay, now homework's broken, right? I'm not a big fan of homework, but we rely on it in some ways, and if it's broken, we don't necessarily have a great way to replace it. And so, also a number of years ago, I signed up for this daily coding problem email list. So every day I get like a coding problem that's like someone might ask you in a job interview. In case I ever have to do a job interview, I can practice them. And so, just for fun, every time I got one, I'd punch it into ChatGPT and say, like, how would you solve this problem? And, it knocks them out every time. And because I've done coding interviews myself, sometimes I'll, go the next step and say, okay, tell me about the time complexity. What if I wanted to use less space and this and that? And it gets them all right. So, your take-home coding problem, broken. College admissions essays, broken. Job cover letters, broken, et cetera, et cetera. And like I said, I'm not a huge fan of homework, but the last thing I need is that my daughter to be like spending an hour writing essays when all of her less scrupulous classmates are just like punching it into ChatGPT and getting it for free. And I don't know that teachers get this yet. Some do, but some don't. And I'm not sure how much people are out there thinking about how much ChatGPT and these LLMs like break things. Not in terms of like, oh, I'm gonna fine tune this to solve this problem that your business has, but in terms of I'm putting a tool in the hands of people today that's going to allow them to like break systems that we rely on today. And that doesn't make ChatGPT bad, but it makes it something that our systems and institutions need to account for. So, maybe some of this, uneasiness is based on the fact that unlike, Midjourney or DALL-E or whatever, the things that ChatGPT does, either one, they play some kind of important role in assessment algorithms that we use quite broadly, or they're people's jobs. And there's a lot of stuff that ChatGPT does that, is people's jobs. So your job is like writing recipes on the internet. Well, I can go to ChatGPT and say, hey, by the way, I've got chicken and broccoli and cheddar cheese in my refrigerator, and I'd like something for dinner that's low carb and that maybe has some Cajun seasoning in it. Give me back a recipe. Now, maybe I can find a recipe like that in a recipe blog, but maybe I don't need to. The guy I work with whose skill is that he can solve any Git problem, right? I've screwed up my repo so bad, I don't know how to fix it, but there's this guy over there, and he knows everything about Git, and he's going to tell me exactly what to type in to get my repository back into a usable state. Well, you know what? ChatGPT can do that too. The woman over there who knows how to design CSS animation so that the ellipsis goes ... on your webpage, ChatGPT can do that. The guy who writes data science books and gives conference talks and does full stack ML and engineering and product for a startup, I don't know if ChatGPT can do that yet, but I also don't know like how long I have. And if you saw Paige's talk this morning about how Google AI is trying to automate software developers away. Luckily, my company's on AWS, so I'm safe for now. But I'm not sure for how long. And there are some things that we'll never be able to replace. If you ask it to make fun of Gen Z and their use of language, it refuses to, or at least used to refuse to. So I can still use my Riz to slay there, if need be. And some of you, if I talked last year, and you heard my intro, last year I did not work at Flatfile. I worked at a big investment bank. I got laid off, so now I work at Flatfile. And in Flatfile, everything is in JavaScript and TypeScript in a framework called Nest.js, using an ORM called Prisma and a query builder called Knex. And I've been doing Python for like so many years. I've not been doing JavaScript. And, I picked up some JavaScript on the street like everyone does, but like I'm not a JavaScript guy, I'm not a TypeScript guy. And so like when I get a Python error, I know how to solve it, I know what it means. But when I get a JavaScript error, I'm like, what the heck is this? And I'm a principal engineer, so I can't just like go around asking people like, hey, it said object, what is that? But I can ask ChatGPT, and ChatGPT like understood all these things. And when my TypeScript doesn't compile, it generally can figure out why. And it helps me look like I know what I'm doing. And eventually, I sort of do know what I'm doing. So, here's a problem. It's kind of small, but it's basically using a JavaScript VM library that runs some code in an untrusted way, and I'd like to get a value out of it. And it wasn't returning me a value. And was the answer to my problem somewhere in Stack Overflow? I suspect it was, but the Stack Overflow workflow, it's sort of like this breadth first search, right? You click a link, you say, does this have anything interesting? Okay, I'll try it. that didn't work. All right, I'll go back to step one, find another link, click it, does everything, and so on and so forth. Whereas the ChatGPT workflow is more like this kind of pathfinding. I tell it my problem, it gives me a suggestion, I try it, I say, hey, that didn't work, and here's the error I got when I tried it. It says, okay, that's a good point, here's what to try next, based on the error I got. And so I keep getting these revised suggestions that like help direct me to my problem instead of like giving me a bunch of different things that might solve my problem. And that ends up making quite a big difference. Because the conversation leads me down new paths, and if I'm doing my job good, it suggests to me new things I should ask. Hey, now that you've said that, that makes me think of this other thing. Like, what about that? Could that be the issue? And so I end up conversing with it like I converse with a coworker. So much so that I actually waste my precious GPT-4 quota on being polite and thanking the machine. And some of my coworkers make fun of me for doing this. They're like, why are you thanking the machine? It doesn't care. But I don't know, it feels like the right thing to do. And cultivating thankfulness is good for the soul anyway, so why not? But the key mental shift that I had to make was this shift from what's a question that's similar to mine but that someone else has already answered, just to what's the question I want answered. Here's a dumb example I made up where it's like, write a function that capitalizes all the letters in prime number position. So probably no one has ever posted code to do this on the internet because it's like some dumb thing that I made up. And so if you go to Stack Overflow or Google, it's going to give you, oh, here's how to capitalize strings, or here's prime numbers. But ChatGPT kind of puts it together for you. And so thinking about, I have this tool that's gonna put it together for me is real powerful, but came a little bit unnatural to me. And it took me a while to figure this out. Here's me in April insisting that I found Copilot more useful than ChatGPT. And I was very wrong about this, and it wasn't that long ago, but I was wrong. But Copilot sort of writes boilerplate code for me and auto-completes things like that. But ChatGPT teaches me things and diagnoses problems and gets to the heart of my misunderstanding. And part of why it took me a long time is that Copilot happens automatically in VS Code, whereas ChatGPT I had to think to go and do it, and I would never remember to do that. It took me a while to make that be my first go-to. But then I started, when I get a cool solution, I share it around, and people are like, wow, can you teach me how to use that better? And can I watch you while you're using ChatGPT for your coding? And so, one, this has changed the way that I work, but two, other people who are also pretty senior, can you show me how to use this and show me how to transform the way that they work as well. And so, a lot of people who are LLM skeptics will get mad and say, oh, it's just like a machine that hallucinates or that makes things up. But if you think about the fact that it makes things up, that's a lot of what makes it powerful, is that it can come up with things that it hasn't seen before. And one person's hallucination is another person's novel concept. So I worked at a startup, it's a small team. One of my colleagues went on vacation for a week and a half, and he was leading the Stripe integration. And so he's like, can someone take this over for me while I'm out? And so I was like, okay, I'll do it. But I've never written a Stripe integration. I've never even worked with the Stripe API. People say nice things about their documentation. I actually found it pretty unhelpful. But who knows a lot about the Stripe API is ChatGPT. So I tell it, here's what I need to do. I want to use a JavaScript library. Tell me how to do it. And it would tell me something, I'd try it, it would work, it wouldn't work. I'd say it didn't work. What can I do next? And not only does it know a lot about the library, but it lets me ask clarifying questions and it lets me iterate towards a solution. So literally some of these things I would have spent hours trying to figure out if I did not have this tool to kind of help me figure it out. And so I built this integration in a week that without ChatGPT or some kind of Stripe expert to guide me would have literally taken me a month. So that's a superpower. And it's not just me, it's not just software engineers and data scientists. This is a friend of mine who works at an energy company. He's on a 2-person IT team, so they keep people's computers running and automate things and stuff like that. And he told me they refer to ChatGPT as their third team member. So there's a two-person IT team. This is their third team member. So this is pretty remarkable, right? It's a $20 a month tool that gives them an extra person worth of IT support in this company. And you're not going to meet this guy at data science conferences because he's not a data scientist, he's IT. But like, how many of him are out there like using this tool in ways that we don't know about? And your $20 a month gets you not just access to ChatGPT, to GPT-4, but also insurance against the future, so that when GPT-6 takes over the world, it will remember that you helped fund its development, rather than someone who was wringing your hands about ethics or something like that. But the thing that really kind of amazed me, I moved from Seattle to San Antonio a couple years ago, and San Antonio is not a big tech city. Like, it has cybersecurity and like military people, but there's not a lot of like software engineering. There's not a lot of data science, machine learning, anything like that. There's this nice data science meetup that I go to sometimes, but it's a lot of people doing like analytics on healthcare data or cybersecurity. So and so like my friends, they're like, oh, that's Joel. He works in IT, right? I was like, sure. Why not? And then they'll ask me to fix their laptop, which I can't do. But so San Antonio is not like a big tech town, but in March I went to a birthday dinner for a friend. Like, I was the only software person there, and people wanted to talk about ChatGPT. They wanted to talk about it. The 8th graders at my table, they knew tons about it. Everybody knew about it. Everybody was talking about it. And so this was like, when I was doing NLP 5 years ago, nobody was talking about it. So this was like mind-blowing to me. And so part of that is that I've ended up introducing a lot of people to ChatGPT for the first time. So these people are not online. They don't do Twitter or Blue Sky or Threads or Mastodon. They're not coders. They don't do Python. They don't know Transformers or Hugging Face. But they know iPhones because they have iPhones. And they know chatting online, right? So I show it to them on my phone, and they're like, wait, how can this be? How can my phone do this? And I keep experiencing that awe secondhand, over and over again, right? And so just to harp on this point a little bit, not only does ChatGPT do things that previously only humans can do, it doesn't require any particular technical skill to use, right? It's just a little box on your phone that you type stuff into. So I have another friend who sells medical lasers, right? So we're hanging out. He hadn't heard of ChatGPT, so I showed it to him, and I said, what's the name of one of the lasers you sell? He said, Silk Road. I said, okay, how do you spell that? He told me. And I said, who are you selling it today? And he said, a dermatologist. I said, okay, tell me something about this dermatologist. He said, oh, he likes to play tennis. So I pulled out the phone, I pulled up ChatGPT, and I said, convince me to buy a Silk Road laser. I'm a dermatologist. I like to play tennis. And boom, it writes out this 10-paragraph sales pitch that goes on forever. And I asked him, I don't know anything about lasers. I said, is this a good pitch? He's like, yeah, that's a good pitch. And some of it seems corny. It's like, oh, you'll have more time to indulge in your favorite sport. But a lot of stuff salespeople do seems corny to me. So I don't know if it's bad or not. But imagine that you're not a software person, you're not a tech person. You have some non-tech job, and someone brings you a phone and says, here's a phone that can do your job. It's kind of mind-blowing, right? And so a few weeks later, I saw him, and it's clear he'd been thinking about this the whole time. And he's like, you got to help me get set up with ChatGPT so that I can use it as part of my sales process. And now every time I see him, he has a story for me about how he made a sale using ChatGPT to help him. Or he has somone who's being reluctant to sales, so he's using ChatGPT to come up with arguments. And so it's literally changed the way he works. He's not a techie. He's a guy who sells lasers to doctors. So again, how many people like that are out there? And probably most of them don't have a friend who badgers them to use ChatGPT, but some of them do. And so a lot of people are building things on these LLMs, but what's more interesting to me is here's this sort of general purpose, easy to use LLM, and how are people getting value out of it, right? It helps me code, it helps one friend run IT at an oil company, it helps another friend sell medical devices, it helped my wife write a statement of purpose for a job she was applying to, it would help my daughter with her homework if she was a little bit more unscrupulous, but because it's simple to use and it can do a lot of different things, which is cool. And sometimes I think about the spiritual aspects of it, because every time I pull up a ChatGPT, it feels like I'm summoning a demon a little bit. Not that I know what that feels like, but here's this little thing that I've conjured into being, and it's going to answer my questions, and then it's going to go away. And then tomorrow I'm going to conjure another one into being, and it's going to answer my questions, and it's going to go away. And it's weird, right? And if you ask ChatGPT if that's what it is, it will say, no, I've got nothing to do with the occult, but its denials are not that credible. The other thing I want to harp on, and then I'll try to wrap up, because it worries me, is this sort of trapped in amber phenomenon, right? Is it even worth developing a new tool at this point if ChatGPT isn't going to know about it? I mean, at some point it'll get updated, but when's that going to happen, and how often is it going to get updated, right? So, these are all pulled from my ChatGPT history, and I actually can't read them because it's too small on the screen. But, as of my last knowledge update in September 21, as of my knowledge cutoff in September 2021, knowledge cutoff, 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 knowledge cutoff. And this is not like an academic concern. One of my colleagues built this command key menu for our product using the CMDK React library. So I took it over for a moment to add some new features, but I'm not a React expert. I work with React experts, and they tell me when I've done things that are like egregious, but they have other stuff to do. So I asked ChatGPT for help. And of course, ChatGPT says, as of the training cutoff, the library you're trying to use doesn't exist. I'm pretty sure it exists. I'm using it, but like from ChatGPT's perspective, it doesn't exist because that library was created in July 2022. So now I have to think, do I want to use that library? Because ChatGPT is not going to be able to help me with it. That's like coding with one hand tied behind my back, right? If you're not as reliant on ChatGPT as I am, imagine there's some library that if you use it, you don't get autocomplete in your IDE, or you can't write unit tests for that code, or it doesn't have documentation. You'd think twice about using that. So I have a dream of making my own data frame library that's better than every other data frame library, right? Like Pandas were way better. But do I want to build it if the AI coding assistant is not going to know about it? And when you ask it about the differences, it'll say, I don't know what that is. Use Pandas. How do I load a CSV? I've never heard of that library, but here's how you do it in Pandas. Well, I can't really compete with Pandas if that's how people are getting help. So that's interesting and real, and it's crazy. In some sense, September 2021 is the end of history. So sometimes I think about writing a sci-fi story about a society that refuses to believe in anything that happened after the ChatGPT knowledge cutoff. ChatGPT doesn't know about it, it's not true. But I probably won't ever do it because I'm not good at writing fiction. But there's a proposal now to remove the global interpreter lock in Python, right? That prevents you from running multi-threaded code. But can you remove it at this point? Because ChatGPT thinks it's there. So if you ask ChatGPT about how do I get around the GIL, it's it's still there. And whenever you remove it, it's sort of, you have to retrain the whole model and get rid of all the data that doesn't exist. I don't know. It's the right time to remove it was 2 years ago, I guess. All that said, I've really come to think of working with ChatGPT as a kind of pair programming, right? Because if you use the GPT-4 model, it's actually really good at what it does. And it's not autocomplete, it's not code assist. It's I'm going back and forth with the machine. Here's what I want to do. What are my options? What are the trade-offs? Why won't this idea work? And sometimes it's dumb. The other day, a song popped into my head, some 90s alt-rock song, whatever. And I was I can't remember who sang the song, so I'll ask ChatGPT. And it goes off about some classic of Brazilian 80s music, and who knows, I don't even know if that band exists. And then I dug around a little bit, and it was actually not Andre, it was Andre with the S, and then, that clarifies things. I guess I won't hallucinate anymore, I'll give you the right answer. This was a weird interaction, and it does actually give me a little bit of pause, because I feel like I asked a question in a reasonable way and got a very stupid answer. And luckily, I knew enough to know that stupid answer I got was wrong. But, even so, I think the goods for me outweigh the bads, and I'm paying $20 a month for access to daemons that make me a lot better at what I do, and that impress my friends, and that bring me not a small amount of joy. And besides, $20 is a small price to pay for being able to be a hero on the way to the conference when the flight is delayed because there's a problem with the flight computer, and I can say, I don't know anything about it, but I bet ChatGPT knows a lot about it. And then it turns out that maybe that's not a good idea, because then United Airlines had a full ground stop for all their planes. But that's what I got. So thank you, and I don't know if I have time for questions or.
So could you ask ChatGPT to write a novel for you?
To write what?
Your novel, your sci-fi novel.
So it's interesting. So I've been working on a novel for like 5 years and like not making much progress. And literally I went like a year without writing a single word because I was like stuck. And so I don't want to ask it to write my novel for me because so far it's really bad at like long range consistency. So like if you get a context window worth of time out of context, it's gonna like drift, and by the end, like it's not enough. Although there's some other models, some other LLMs that maybe do have enough context window. But a novel needs to have things. It's what they say. The knife is in the first like chapter, and then it has to be used by the end. And I don't trust these LLMs to like get all that right. But what I have done a little bit is use it to get me unstuck and say, here's a character in this situation. I want to get him in that situation. How do I get from A to B? And it'll give me some ideas. Or here's a character who, or like I said, there's a lot of to-dos in my novel, right? Like you leave to-dos in code. I'd say, so-and-so had a habit of doing, some weird activity. For example, to do, like make a list of these activities. And then I go to ChatGPT and say, like, here's a character who has like a weird activity they do. Like, give me some good examples that are compelling. So like, it's good at stuff like that actually, and I should probably use it more and finish the novel. But I don't think the context is long enough to like write a whole novel.
Good question. Thank you very much, Joel.